Another mass shooting just a week after Atlanta. 10 dead in a grocery store in Boulder, Colorado. Tuesday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for Tuesday, March 23rd. I'm Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Carlo, good morning.
Good morning, Jill. Just before we get to the news, and there's a lot of it today, how are you feeling? A little better?
A little better.
Okay.
And I stayed up way too late watching the Michigan game, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit at the end of the podcast. And right after the game, unfortunately, this breaking news banner about this shooting in Colorado. So let's get to this still developing story out of Colorado. A gunman opened fire inside of a crowded grocery store in Boulder, killing 10 people, including a police officer, and sending terrified shoppers running for safety. Local news chopper video showed officers escorting a shirtless man in handcuffs with blood running down his leg from the King Superstore. He's believed to be the sole suspect. He has not been identified, nor have most of the victims. The officer who was killed was identified as 51-year-old Eric Talley. He'd been on the force since 2010. He was the first officer on the scene. He had 7 children, according to a statement. Horrible.
I can't. This is the second mass shooting in this country in a week. Before Atlanta, we had gone an entire year without a large-scale public shooting, if you can believe that, which is maybe why this feels even more upsetting than these things usually do. We don't know much yet, including really any details about this suspect or the weapon he used, though I will go out on a limb and predict that it's going to be a white man in his 20s who used a legally purchased AR-15 style gun. I don't know if that's the case, but I'm sure it will be. This is also the first shooting, Jill, since the federal government has sort of been realigned with Democrats in control. So I think it'll be interesting to watch how politicians respond. Are we just going to get sort of the usual pablum, all talk, no action? Do Republicans do the usual, now is not the time to politicize the issue? One of Colorado's new representatives in Congress is this woman, Lauren Boebert, who's pretty much sole claim to fame is that she carries a gun around. So is she going to say something incredibly offensive today that takes the media spotlight off of the victims before everyone just forgets and moves on, which is sort of how these stories tend to go? And also, does this increase urgency on Dems trying to kill the filibuster and actually getting some kind of gun control through? I don't know. But before that, we have to find out more about these victims and tell their stories, because it's just an unbelievably all of these are obviously just incredibly upsetting stories.
It was, it was the one silver lining. I don't even know how you would describe it, but the one nice thing about the lockdowns and quarantines in this past year is that we didn't have school shootings and mass shootings. And now, as things open up, 2 mass shootings in the matter of a week. And Americans overwhelmingly want stronger gun laws. That's what's so, I think, frustrating when you look at what's going on in terms of DC and gun laws. 90% of Americans support stronger gun laws. You don't have to be anti-gun to say, hey, I think everyone who gets a firearm should have a background check, or I don't think that we need assault-style weapons on streets. Civilians don't. That wasn't what the Second Amendment was about. So, I think that's what's just so incredibly frustrating. So CNN, we don't know the weapon yet, right? It's not confirmed, but as CNN is, according to sources, is saying it was an AR-15 style rifle. And in Colorado, actually, just a couple of weeks ago, a judge had blocked Boulder from enforcing a 2-year-old assault rifle ban because the NRA had sued, basically saying it was up to local municipalities to be enforcing it. It was seen as a big win for the NRA. They tweeted about it. That was just 2 weeks ago, and look what happened. And I don't want to, I'm not trying to, set up a cause and effect here, but gun laws make a difference in terms of gun crimes. And I don't, it's just so incredibly frustrating. And this was, and not that any victim of a shooting is justified, but this was a 2:30 in the afternoon at a supermarket, people food shopping, getting COVID vaccines. They were doing at that
Yeah.
supermarket. No, it's a tragedy on all levels here, Carlo.
I'm curious, Jill. I know this wasn't a school shooting, obviously, but I'm curious if parenthood has sort of made these stories even more upsetting to you, because I got gun mass shootings upset me on a visceral level that no other real news events do, and I don't even have a kid yet. So I'm just curious if you, when you've became a mother, if you sort of noted how these kinds of sort of stories about just random acts of violence feel even more visceral to you.
I think so, especially when kids are involved. I mean,
Yeah, of
the
course.
Sandy Hook shooting was obviously,
Yeah.
and I said it at the time. It's like if that didn't move, the needle at all in terms of gun laws, I don't know what will. Right? I mean, you are
Yeah.
talking about kindergarteners and first graders who were just shot dead by a crazy gunman. So I don't know what happens, but yeah, I mean, I think about it, especially I send my daughter to a Jewish school. So I think about it all the time. And
Yeah.
I've spoken about this before, but one of my big questions wasn't about the curriculum when I decided to send her there. It was about what's your security situation? And it's
Yeah.
unfortunate, but there are armed guards at the school
It's
every
just
time school's in session. And a lot of teachers have said, even in terms of COVID stuff, it's been nice to have to open the windows. A lot of schools the windows are closed out of a safety precaution because of shooters. So, what does
What are we
that tell you
doing?
about
These
the
are our
state of this
children.
country? I know.
These are our children. What are we doing? I'm sorry. I don't mean to go off on a thing, especially because this was not a school shooting, obviously, and we'll find out more, and we'll bring you we'll probably get a lot more information today.
Okay, so we are expecting a press conference actually out of Colorado sometime this morning. So we should have a lot more information by tomorrow. Democrats in D.C. right now focusing on infrastructure, basically to the exclusion of any other big legislation as we talk about what's going on with
Right.
gun laws. We'll see if this reignites the conversation. But the White
Yeah.
House is working on this major new spending proposal tied to infrastructure and climate change. When everything is said and done, the bill could eclipse the size of the $1.9 trillion stimulus bill. There's money for things like bridges, roads, broadband, and renewable energy. The White House wants to do infrastructure with some level of bipartisanship, but the proposal being worked out now is said to include tax hikes on corporations and the wealthy to pay for some of it, which is likely a non-starter for Republicans.
The New York Times reporting that number in the ballpark of $3 trillion. That's a lot of money, and includes money for not just obvious infrastructure things like what you mentioned, but things like childcare, such as universal pre-K and free community college tuition. So that's a little bit interesting. They're trying to tie that into this infrastructure bill. Our infrastructure grade, by the way, C-. That's what the American Society of Civil Engineers grades us. It would be hard to think of an issue that could be more bipartisan than spending money to fix things like our airports and our interstates and our water supply and our power grids. But the tax hikes, like you said, are probably going to make this thing DOA for Republicans, which means the Democrats and Biden will be able to do it as a budget reconciliation bill later this year when the next budget comes out, which I think is September or October. But in order to do that, they would have to hold the line in the Senate. They couldn't lose. It would be like the stimulus bill. They couldn't lose any votes at all.
Let's switch gears and talk a little bit about what's going on with the AstraZeneca vaccine and the vaccine situation in this country. Federal health officials with the NIH, which is Dr. Fauci's office, released an unusual statement last night questioning whether AstraZeneca included outdated information from its large-scale clinical trials that may have created an incomplete view of its efficacy. The pharmaceutical giant has not yet responded. Meanwhile, more states are now opening up eligibility. Tennessee, West Virginia, and Arizona will make all residents 16 and up eligible for shots in coming weeks. New York's opened it up to anyone 50 and older. Cases now climbing in more than half of the states in this country.
What is going on with AstraZeneca? I mean, are they trying to make people lose trust in this vaccine because it's working? I'm not. I mean, maybe these are legitimate issues that the NIH is having, but like this vaccine is effectively a dud at this point. Like people, at least here, people aren't going to take it with all of this new information coming out. It just muddies the water. It's incredible. But speaking about the the rise in cases, Jill. I have this new analogy for what this stage of the pandemic feels like that I was sort of testing out on Becky last night, but she didn't really pay any attention to me. So I'm gonna try it out.
Lay it on us, Carlo.
Yes, as typical. So I'm gonna try it out on you. So you know the feeling when you're flying. Remember what that was like when you're in a plane, and you're in your plane, you're in your seat, you're all comfortable. The pilot comes on and he says, "Okay, we're going to begin our descent." But like the weather's really bad. You're landing in the middle of a really big storm. You know everything's going to be okay because planes don't really crash because of weather events, which you remind yourself. But then the period of descent really starts to feel like it takes forever and it's smooth. And then all of a sudden you hit that rough air and your stomach flips over and you get that horrible feeling. And then part of you is like looking out the window. And even though you're a seasoned flyer, you're like, holy crap, is this plane going to crash? Like this doesn't look good. But then it doesn't crash. And the next thing you know, you're taxiing to the gate and all is fine. I feel like that's what we're going through right now. We're going to land. We're going to land. Sooner rather than later, we're going to land. But boy, is it an unpleasant experience on the way down.
Okay, I'm with you.
Right?
I
Does it
buy
sort of feel
it.
like that?
Like,
Okay.
we're going to get to the other side of this. It's just how much pain
Yeah.
do we have to endure before
Exactly.
we get there.
Exactly.
I like it. But okay, I just want to comment on the AstraZeneca vaccine. It's just so bizarre what is going on with this vaccine in terms of the data, and that the NIH even came out to say that. Because that is the vaccine that's being primarily used in the UK. And it is working. It is working in the UK. The UK
Right.
is home to, of course, the UK variant, which is now here in the US, but much more transmissible, deadlier as well. And cases are dramatically down there. Not only that, they have employed a different strategy because the situation was so dire, where they've said, we're just giving people one dose at this point. Get one dose into as many arms as humanly possible, and then we'll figure out the second dose, even if it's 2 months later and not 28 days or whatever the time is for that. So that's what's so bizarre. We know that the vaccine is quite effective. So why not just kind of give all of the data? I don't understand.
I think that I endorse that the one shot, just shots in arms technique now. I mean, not that it matters what I think, and I'm obviously not a public health official, but it just seems like because we're at this plateau level, it just seems like we should just be jabbing people as many as we can. Like there should be National Guard guys walking down the streets, like jabbing you in the arm. Seriously, like it's really a race against time. We have got to get to just, we're so close. We're so close.
Not only that, it's not only about keeping people safe, it's these variants too. It's the fewer people that get really sick or even get the virus, the less opportunity there is for these variants to form. Okay, some news that you can use. Krispy Kreme is going to give anyone who shows their vaccination card a free glazed donut any day, anytime, as often as they want for the rest of the year. It's one of the more enticing of the freebies that some businesses are offering to promote vaccines. I thought I was misreading. We reported this on Cheddar yesterday, and I thought it was a misprint or something. I thought you get one donut per when you get your shot, and they stamp it and say you already got your donut. Not so.
You can just go. Yeah, you can go in, show your vaccine, eat the donut, go through the revolving door, come back. That's what I would do. God, those Krispy Kreme donuts are so dangerous. They're not the only company, by the way, doing these things. A Phoenix pot dispensary, by the way, giving a free edible to anyone who shows their vaccination card. And I actually looked this up last night because I don't know why, but there's a Krispy Kreme 15 minutes away from that dispensary. So once your free edible kicks in, you can go over and get your free donut. Little FYI to our Arizona listeners.
Let's talk a little weather. Two colliding weather systems have led to some of the heaviest rains and worst flooding in decades in New South Wales and Australia. And this includes the area of Sydney. Some locations have actually seen 40 inches of rain since Thursday. The worst is not expected to let up until tomorrow at the earliest. And residents are reporting that trees are filled with snakes and spiders seeking higher ground. Talk about like end of the world stuff. Yikes.
Yeah. This is what you went to. You did your abroad where? In Sydney?
Yeah, I actually went to the University of New South Wales. That's where I quote unquote studied while I was abroad. But yeah, I lived in a suburb of Sydney, which is one of the most beautiful cities. So this is terrible.
Yeah, this is the same region, by the way, that was decimated by those brush fires earlier last year. They're also dealing with a huge influx of mice after a really productive grain harvest. So there's just mice running around everywhere. So the hope now is that the biblical flooding is going to drive out the rodent plague in Australia. Also known as just your average Tuesday in Australia.
Let's talk a little bit about the housing market. If you needed more evidence that the housing market is just completely out of whack, sales of existing homes fell a shocking 6.6% in February. That number usually goes up in February as people start to list their homes ahead of the spring buying season. The number of homes for sale in the U.S. fell 30% year over year. It's the largest decline ever. So, Carlo, this is a supply issue, not a demand issue. There's actually plenty of demand. Houses that do go up for sale now spending just 20 days on the market on average.
Check this statistic out. There's 1 million, exactly 1 million homes for sale in the United States right now. There's 1.3 active realtors in the United States. The supply of homes right now is so tight that there are more brokers than there are houses in this country. Crazy. That's craziness. Look, I don't want to tell people what to do and how to spend their money or how to live their lives, but I mean, it just seems to me like it's so obvious that this is just, if you're in the housing market and you're considering buying, just rent. Just rent. Don't buy into this. It's too weird. You don't want to buy into the top of a market like this.
Words to live by Carlo Versano. Thank you, Carlo. All right, Carlo, let's talk a little basketball. The men's NCAA tournament, not the only game in town right now. The women's tournament happening in San Antonio, and it's starting to produce its first upsets after round one wrapped up last night. So number 11, BYU, knocked off number 6, Rutgers for the first big upset, followed by number 12, Belmont, taking out number 5, Gonzaga, and number 13, Wright State, beating number 4, Arkansas. The second round of that tournament starts tomorrow.
In the men's, number 7, Oregon, beat
Oregon.
I don't know why I say Oregon. People actually have written in the past and complained about that, so I apologize. To our Oregonians, I'm sorry. It's really no excuse for that. Number 7, Oregon, knocked out number 2, Iowa. Number 11, UCLA beat Abilene Christian, knocking out their Cinderella story. USC took out Kansas, and your friends over in Michigan beat LSU last night to become the sole Big Ten squad to advance to the Sweet 16, which is pretty incredible considering there's 4 teams from the Pac-12, which is arguably a worse division. The next round in the men's starts on Saturday, so there's a couple days off here.
What a great game. At the LSU-Michigan game last night, I was up. Yep. I was so tired. I was almost good. I was like, oh, I would love to go to sleep.
Some days it's worth it,
but it was so worth it. It was such a good game. And I will say, without our star player, who's injured right now, I feel like the team, you're seeing some guys who perhaps didn't get a lot of playing time or, didn't get a chance to shine. And they're really stepping up.
That's sort of the story. That's sort of the story of this March Madness. I think there's just because of all the COVID weirdness and all the teams that didn't make it that maybe should have. There's a lot of teams out there that are really you wouldn't have seen normally. There's a lot of players getting some action. It's been great so far.
And there are fans in the stands. I mean, it's not a full house, obviously, because of COVID restrictions, but to hear and see real fans just going nuts on the sidelines, I loved it. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, and finally, Carlo, you and I have been joking about COVID weight gain for a year now, but it is the real deal, according to the first studies coming out. A small study of weight measurements from people who regularly check their weight via Bluetooth-enabled scales suggests that adults under lockdown gained about 1.5 pounds a month, which suggests that people who have been more or less doing their same routine for the last year may have gained nearly 20 pounds since the pandemic started. Whoa.
42% of Americans reported undesired pandemic weight gain at a median of 15 pounds. That's according to a separate study from the American Psychological Association, which also found, look at this. This study found that the average weight gain was 29 pounds and 41 pounds for millennials. That cannot be right. 41 pounds? I mean, I've probably put on a solid 10 in the last year. I mean, I'm definitely like a pant size bigger than I was this time last year. But actually, I don't even know if that's true because I've worn almost exclusively drawstring bottoms for a year now. So actually, I don't even know. If I put on my jeans right now, I have no idea.
Bottoms, your way of saying sweatpants?
Sweatpants, short, like athletic shorts. Yeah.
Got it. 41
Like I haven't worn a
seems
belt.
insane.
I haven't worn a belt in a year.
No, 41 pounds seems nuts. The Peloton really saved me. I will say, things were not looking pretty by the end of last year. But all right, well, I don't think those Krispy Kremes are going to help matters, but it's still a great deal. So show your vaccine card and go get some. Unfortunately, Carla, we've got to leave it there. But that is what you need to know for Tuesday, March 23rd.
See you tomorrow.